Since we are a social impact consulting panel, I think it's important for me to point out that Northrop Nonprofit Consulting, that esteemed firm, is me. My husband is my IT department. My kids do research for me, but I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of great organizations, and actually it's that background, as well as my Anderson MBA, that has brought me here today, and I'm just so glad to be in front of all of you. So thank you, Bhavna. Thank you to the Center for Impact. Thank you to our guests who are going to create an amazing conversation and dialogue that we will invite you to participate in later on. We're going to skip the Slido effort because we're a small enough group that we want to hear directly from you. So if you have questions, we will have some time at the end for those questions to be addressed to our panelists. We're basically going to do some quick introductions. You get to know a little bit about who these folks are, and a little bit about how they know each other. And then we're going to unpack a bit what makes a great consulting-client relationship from their experience. I will point out the 20 years that we're celebrating this year for a lot of the Center for Impact activities. 20 years ago, because I say that because I kept writing over 20 years for each of you about your careers in social impact in one form or another. So I think we've all been doing this for a few decades. When Anderson first started doing social impact consulting work, it was our Net Impact Consulting Challenge. It was 3 organizations working with like 12 MBA students. And now we've grown to a huge suite of programming with both the Net Impact Consulting Challenge, the course that will take place next quarter, a couple of other classes, and these amazing events, these high impact teas where we get to hear from people doing the great work that I think many of you are interested in, which is social impact consulting. So that we have a sense of who you are, I'd just love to see how many of you, and you can raise your hand multiple times, so don't be worried like waiting for the right answer. How many of you are interested in, are students, current or recent graduates, interested in social impact consulting? Raise your hand. Cool, that's a good proportion of you. How many of you are interested in kind of traditional consulting, non-social impact focused? Okay. How many of you are from, how many alums do we have? Great. I see 2 of those alum hands come from our Center for Impact board members. So thank you for being here and joining us today, Asha and Lance. And other colleagues and friends kind of from my generation, Laura and Clayton, who have been doing this work as long as we all have. And how many of you are from nonprofit organizations? Excellent. I was really glad to see so many folks register because you're why we're able to do what we do at Anderson. We wouldn't be able to do the social impact and pro bono consulting without our partner clients. So thank you all for being here. So we have a really exciting format today, and typically when we do, or historically we've done this panel, it's just been consultants, but we really wanted to have a dialogue between folks on both sides of the coin, both the folks that are hiring consultants and those that are serving the clients that hire them. So I'm going to welcome our panelists, and I'm going to try and do it in order with Caroline, and I'm just going to do their first names because we all get to know each other, and this is kind of the informal setting. Caroline, I'm just going to do briefly their backgrounds. I'm not going to do a full bio because I know how awkward that is because I get it done for me all the time reading the bio. But I am going to ask them to introduce themselves a little bit more than I have, and then talk a little bit about the relationships that they have between the client consultant pairs. But just briefly, Caroline is the founder and CEO of Platypus Advisors. Platypus Advisors has been around since 2020 and is a huge friend of Anderson. We have a lot of folks from Anderson who have been affiliated with and continue to be working with Platypus Advisors. Before that, 2 decades in impact at nonprofits and tech firms, some little brands you might have heard of like Eventbrite, like Twitter, like HP. So bringing all of those years of experience into the social impact space. So please welcome Caroline. Joel is the ED of Snap Foundation. Before that, he was with 826 LA, the Unusual Suspects Theater Company. Before that, and this is what I love reading about your bio, before that in the education space. So teaching both at the high school level as well as teaching adult learners with neurodiversity experiences. And just knowing that, I'm sure was a thread throughout your entire career and continues to be. So please welcome Joel. Next, Wei Ting Chen, another friend of Anderson for many, many years, even though not an alum. You'll hear about her background. And most of these people also collaborate with that school across the city, which is just fine. We want to build the sector in the space. Wei Ting is the co-founder and senior partner at Blue Garnet, over 20 years again, really focusing on strategy. And I always think of Blue Garnet as this amazing firm that marries strategy and evaluation, and really focuses their clients on creating an impact goal and working towards that in a very cohesive and integrated way. Before that, she was in consulting in the private sector and economic development. Please welcome Wei Ting. And that, last but not least, Jacqueline Chun is Associate Director for the Center for Strategic Partnerships. Again, 20 plus years in the nonprofit sector, many, many years at the Carl and Roberta Deutsch Foundation. She led strategic grant making for many years, lots of work in public-private partnerships, which I'm noticing a lot of my students are interested in the space, and I notice each of you has done something specific, and I didn't have a question about it, but I invite you, if you have thoughts on that, to speak to public-private partnerships. So please join me in welcoming Jacqueline Chun. All right, so let's go across or around or however, whatever order you want to go in, and just briefly tell us a little bit about your background. I kind of gave a few of the highlights. Those probably aren't the highlights that you would emphasize about your background. And maybe just how you got to the position that you're in now, the role that you're in now, because I think those are always pretty interesting stories.
Sure.
Yeah, start with Jacqueline.
Sure, I'm happy to start. So hi, I'm Jacqueline with the Center for Strategic Partnerships. I have spent much of my career in grant making and philanthropy. That's where I started right out of school, and up until about 8 months ago, had been at the Deutsch Foundation for 16 years here locally. And I came into my position because the Center for Strategic Partnerships, it is half housed in the County of LA and half housed in philanthropy. So we are the definition of a public-private partnership, both in the work that we do and the architecture of the center. And as a grant maker, when I was at Deutsch, I funded the center both in sort of the backbone support, but also the joint initiatives that the center implements around, and those are always public-private partnerships around systems change. So the center, we focus on how to transform systems within the County of LA that better serve children, youth, and families. And we do that by partnering with the private sector and innovation, piloting, not things that the government is typically known for, but something that the private partners help us to do. And a little more about my background. I am not originally from Los Angeles, but have spent now 20 years. This is my 20th year, I think, or almost 20 years in LA. So the longest place I've lived outside of where I was born, which was Ohio. And I have came out here for personal reasons and have one son and a dog with a furry friend, which I call I have two puppies, one a furry one and one a not so furry. And yeah, and I think I am motivated to do the work that I do because it's important. And I think there are opportunities. I moved to the center because I wanted to see what new kind of levers I could push and pull in terms of making broader strategic change across this county. And hopefully, as they say, the way LA goes, the nation goes. So hopefully to influence and model for other regions.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wei Ting, and I am also not a native Southern Californian, but have been here for a few decades now. One of the things I'll just start with saying, all my life I've really cared a lot about issues related to poverty and inequity. They manifested in my life through economic development, and so I kind of did an econ international development background. I chose to do that, and then at some point I decided I was going to go back to business schools because I wanted to figure out how real organizations and companies made decisions in a practical way. And then I went to business school, not here in Southern California, sorry, and came out and did traditional management consulting because I thought, you know what, I really need to better understand how the concepts or the 3 C's, the 4 P's, how they actually translate into real work and decision making. And I did management consulting for a few years, paid off my student loan. I had a tremendous learning experience and learned a lot about myself. At some point, and this related approximately around 9/11, I was in New York City and I realized, gosh, I've become a fantastic consultant, a great team member, awesome employee, and I've neglected all the other hats that I wore in my life. And so at that point, I was like, I got to do something different. And my best friend from undergrad, she was also at another consulting firm. We were kind of at the same place at the same time. And we decided that we would kind of make a switch and do something together to go back to the things that we cared a lot about. So for me, poverty and inequity. And so we started our firm, Blue Garnet. So that was back in 2002. We're now in our 23rd year. We work exclusively in the social sector. We work across tax statuses, so it doesn't matter who you are in terms of your organization. As long as you're trying to achieve a social or environmental impact, we're here to help. One thing I'll just say, just a couple more things that I think might be really relevant here is that when we started, the reason I started this is not because I wanted to be an entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur, it's because the jobs weren't available. So like Bridgespan didn't exist, FSG didn't exist, like none of these firms or companies existed. There was no B Corp movement, like you really had to like find little niches. And finally, Jenny and I were just like, you know what, let's just do what we know what to do, which is consulting. And I didn't care enough about one particular issue to focus. Instead, we decided we would take the skill set we had around decision making and the functional expertise to bring that to help answer questions in the social sector and try to solve problems in the social sector. So that's kind of how the angle we took towards starting Blue Garnet. There's a lot I can share more about. One thing I'm very proud of, not only because of the work that we've done over the years, is that we've also built a company that I want to work for myself. So we really approach it by having people who can wear all hats that they have on their heads and be present and participate in the movement around making the world a better place. So that's a secondary component to it, but I think being in the position of having starts to something, I might as well build something that I actually like.
Yeah. But also great history of the space, because many of us have we're in the same position, and it's a good reminder as to how much the space has grown in the last 20, 25 years.
Tremendously.
Great, thank you. Joel?
Wow. Hi, I'm Joel Arquios. I'm also not a native of Los Angeles. I guess that's the theme we're going with. Grew up on the East Coast, born in Queens, New York. I'm the son of immigrants. My parents, my mom left Cuba during the revolution that took place there back in the 50s. Ended up in Spain where she met my dad, and they moved to New York. I grew up mostly in Elizabeth, New Jersey, went to school in New York, and I always had a passion for sort of underrepresented voices. I kind of wanted to understand sort of the history that I sort of came from, and I didn't see it reflected in the curriculum at school. And so I'd always sort of had that as in the back of my mind. I majored in history in college, history and English, and I've always had that thread of like supporting voices that are not heard. And so I did a lot of work working with adults who are neurodivergent adults in the Sonoma County region. I then got a job as a teacher in San Francisco, where I taught for almost a decade, and I taught history. And my focus was very much helping sort of immigrant communities that I worked with directly in finding stories, the stories that really resonated with them, sort of to help them understand that they also brought valuable stories to this place. And so from there, this organization called 826 opened up, which is started by a writer named Dave Eggers and a teacher Nineveh Caligari. And it was this just wonderful, weird place that opened up in San Francisco that had a pirate store in the front and sold pirate supplies. And I thought, wow, I need to figure out what's going on there. And luckily I got one of their first teacher prize ever, and I got very involved with them for years. And what we did was help young people write stories and publish books and really tell their stories in a way that would live on for a long time. I did that for a few years at the national level, and then I came to LA to run it for almost 13 years. We have 2 chapters in LA and many in different schools, serving over 10,000 kids a year with writing and publishing help. And then the pandemic happened, kept the organization going, but it just felt like maybe new leadership would be needed. Moved into interim work, where I would just help other organizations dealing with some challenges. The Unusual Suspects Theater Company was an organization that worked inside of juvenile detention centers, helping young people tell their stories through theater as a way to heal. That's actually how I met Jacqueline, who was a funder at the time. And then did that for years in interim, found a great director, and Snapchat, the organization I sort of worked for, they started a foundation back in 2017. It's a private foundation that's separate from the company, and they were looking for an executive director. And I threw my hat in the ring, and luckily I was hired. And they really wanted somebody with my perspective who had worked on the side of the nonprofits and also could bring that into the organization. So yeah, I've been doing that for the last 2 years, just celebrated my 2nd year. And it's been incredibly grateful for the work, and really it's challenging as well, but it's been a real learning opportunity for me, and to help focus on Los Angeles. We focus on the creative economy, so we really look at how do we support arts and organizations, also STEAM-based type of organizations, creative spaces, creative youth who are underrepresented, trying to find pathways for them to work in these industries. And we support over 120 nonprofits here in Los Angeles. We only work in Los Angeles, and so it's been a wonderful journey, and it's just beginning. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll just call attention to a couple of things that I'm noticing in these conversations. One is the career paths that they've described, because you're going to learn a lot in listening to the path that each of these folks has taken. And I'm asked this a lot by students, should I go into the private sector first? Should I go into private sector consulting and then social impact consulting? And each one of these folks has a unique pathway that I think you can learn from. So we're not going to talk a lot about that today in the panel, but I encourage you to listen for it, and we welcome those conversations at the reception afterwards. All right, so Caroline.
Well, hi everybody. I'm definitely resonating with the stories here across the panel, and just congratulations to Anderson for this 20th anniversary of doing the impact consulting. I flew in from San Francisco today because UCLA Anderson has been instrumental in building the Platypus firm. So we've not had 1, not 2, but 6 different alums who have helped contribute in architecting the firm and being strategy, brilliant strategists, operational folks doing learning and measurement evaluation. Shout out to Julie and Carol here. I don't know if there are any other platypus in the room yet, but just so grateful for UCLA Anderson for helping architect Platypus. We are an odd creature that navigates between profit, purpose, business, and society. And so a lot of pre-IPO to Fortune 50 tech companies come to us. Okta is a client of ours that we worked with on their philanthropy. The client there is also UCLA Anderson, Aaron Felter. So yay for UCLA Anderson and that opportunity. Nice. It's fun to see where things start and where we are today. I had the good fortune of helping start an organization called Taproot Foundation 25 years ago. And 25 years ago, the idea of pro bono stopped at law.
Yep.
And so we were wanting to imagine a time where a nonprofit could have the same marketing resources as a company, or HR resources, or finance resources. And so developing the blueprints of what has become pro bono and impact consulting, yay, net impact, but like just this idea of now is kind of a ho-hum thing that like, yeah, we do pro bono projects, and that's such a great gateway into doing impact consulting or any consulting that you all do. And so if you don't know Taproot Foundation, check it out. We have a new CEO there, and it's pretty exciting. In addition to being the CEO of Platypus, I'm also on the board of Global Fund for Women, and very, very proud of the work of resilient women around the world who are making great solutions and fighting for some very important causes in the world. So happy to talk about that at the reception as well. So thanks for this opportunity.
Awesome. So you can tell why we're excited to have these folks with us here today. And I'll just ask one of you, any of you, to describe the relationship between the client and consultant pairs that we have here. Either one of you, any of you can jump in, but tell us a little bit about what that, what the project was and how you are working together most recently or most interestingly.
I'm happy
Do you want to
start. So Wei Ting and I have known each other now like 15 years, something around that time. Our relationship began when I was at the foundation on a specific project, but because I couldn't let her go, we had a project at the Center for Strategic Partnerships around strategic planning. We are just about at 9 years, so looking at our 10th year as an organization, as a center, was really looking at where are we going, what is our highest and best use as a public-private partnership. And so reached out to Wei Ting and Blue Garnet to see if they had the capacity and space to do strategic planning with us, and thankfully, yes. And so we've been working together now in this capacity since about October, and imagine this being a long-standing relationship because there's always more planning and thinking to do. And Blue Garnet really helps us to think really through sort of the technical pieces. Firstly is like thinking about the right questions to our stakeholders to really look at comprehensively what is our North Star? Where do we want to go? Defining our North Star, and then how do we get there? What does implementation look like? And but not only those technical pieces, but really being a thought partner, I think, has been a really key piece of just our long-standing relationship here and then previously at the foundation, because there are things that are defined in the project and then there's everything else, and they've been able to fill in those gaps and helping us to think about and asking those right questions so that we only know what we know, but they know so much about from all their other work and the clients that they've worked with, and to think about the work in a different way. And so she is helping us to think through, as an organization that sits in the office of the CEO at LA in the county government, we have 12 department partners and 30 private philanthropic partners. And so a lot of demands on the center, and how to streamline that. How do we not say yes to everything that comes to us of like, center, can you help us with this? Center, can you help us think through this? And yes, we could, but we don't have the capacity. And also, how do we prevent ourselves from going in every direction so that we lose focus on how to best serve children, youth, and families here in LA. And so just really thinking through we can get overwhelmed by looking at everything that we need to do or could do or should do. And for Wei Ting and the team to be outside of that and to think about it as, here are, let's distill it into 3 main areas, and then let's bring it down to what do you need to do in those 3 main areas, and just really simplifying the way we think about the work and how to do the work, and then bringing in the right stakeholders and questions to ask of our stakeholders. God knows we've done a lot of stakeholder interviews in the life of the center, even, obviously before I was there. And so really trying to tap into the things that have been done before, but also then to leverage what hasn't been done and what hasn't been asked. And so they have been the outsider who has also been inside with us, but bringing in that outsider perspective. And we are still in the midst of this strategic planning. We're in phase 2, likely to go into a phase 3. But right now we're defining our North Star. We're looking at, we have an existing North Star, but is that still the North Star? Is that still relevant? And so asking all of those questions and really helping also us to think about, okay, how do we bring in the right team members into different phases of the work as well? And so they organize us in a way that if we were doing it just internally ourselves, we would be, the work wouldn't move forward in the way that we would hope. They keep us accountable towards that end goal. And so, a lot to be thankful for to the Blue Garnet team. Looking forward to continuing the work. And we'll report back with what our North Star is and where year 10 and beyond will take us.
It's awesome. And I'll highlight a few things that you said, because if anyone's wondering, what is the role of a consultant? And we talk about that in my various classes. You just touched on so many of those roles that a consultant can play. A thought partner, somebody that can help identify the North Star, but also how it can be implemented. Having an outside perspective, but working from within as a true partner along the way. And then organizing and holding the group accountable for the process. Sometimes I feel like that's such a huge part of what we're doing as consultants is making sure that we stay on track and deliver against a work plan and a timeline that the client itself has said they want to engage in.
Absolutely. And it is not, Waiting knows it is not foreign to her for me to call her and say, I have this idea, but I don't know how to get there. Yeah. And so she'll just again, distill it down to 1 or 2 questions and then say, okay, let's think about the steps to that. And so just, having someone provide that roadmap for us makes all the difference, because we do as a center tend to want to go in many directions, and they're helping us stay focused.
That's nice. That's great. All right. So what about your client consulting relationship? You want to tell us about that, Joel?
Well, so when I started at Snap, one of the things that I wanted to, make sure I was clear about with my stakeholders, my board, was knowing what direction we were going to be moving in. I certainly had ideas, but I also come from the nonprofit space where a lot of the work was always done sort of in a collective fashion. It's funny, I actually started with Taproot. My first strategic plan was with Taproot back in, I don't know if I've told you this.
That's a great story.
Because we couldn't afford, I was running a nonprofit, and you were being told by funders that you should have a strategic plan because that's really the only way we're going to fund you. And we can't afford it. And so Taproot walked in and they offered free support and services, helped us lay the groundwork, did a SWOT analysis, did all these amazing things that we needed, and helped us really get that going. But, in that sort of situation, you had a staff of about 25 and I had a board of about 12. So there's a lot of folks in the room. In this situation, it's a very small board of 5 now, it was 6 at that time, myself and another staff person. So really trying to figure out, how do we get buy-in together as a group? How do we know we're going to work together? They've entrusted me with this role. How do I make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of where we're going with this work? I thought from being on the other side, oh wow, giving away money, it's such an easy thing to do. Really easy. It's not at all. In fact, you get more nervous about it, at least I do, is how do you make sure that this is going to make a real impact? How am I going to measure that impact? How is this going to, how are we going to ensure that we're really being the right, we're moving this money in the right direction. And so that's why, what was interesting also in this new setting is that, there's a corporation-minded sort of focus, and then there's also nonprofit-minded focus. So those are two worlds that think differently about things. So I wanted to bring someone from the outside who had an understanding of both of those worlds to be able to sort of help us, come together with a common language so that we could speak the same language when we're talking about how our work happens. And so luckily I met you. I forget, somebody connected us through a network, and we just started having conversations. And then when we were looking for a consultant for this piece, we interviewed a bunch of folks, and you stood out in a big way for us because you had the experience, and you also knew how to work with the dynamics in this board that I have. And so we started our relationship, and the focus was really understanding where, what work we've done, what are the communities that we're trying to serve, what is the impact we're trying to make on youth, and really helping us sort of think about what can we achieve in the next 3 to 5 years in a way that we could allow me to say, all right, this is my work plan, this is what I know I'm going to need to raise, or at least bring people in to help me achieve, and these are some of the big goals that I have for these next few years. And it helps me be able to then come back every meeting we have with the board to report on that progress, to show where we've gotten. And it doesn't always stay the same. Obviously, I think as you mentioned, there's always that North Star does change. I like to think of a strategic plan as a living document that is going to be changed. It's going to, sometimes there's going to have to be some tweaking done. But that's why it's great to continue a relationship with folks that helped you establish that, to then go back and see where's the conversation now. How do we move this ship in a new direction if we have to?
So let's use that as a starting off point for, I think, the question that we may spend a lot of time on. We've got like so many questions and not that much time, but I'm really curious what you all think is like the key success factor or a key success factor to an effective consultant-client partnership. And I'm curious about that from both sides. So I don't know, Wei Ting, what would you say?
We were actually talking about this on the drive up too. I think for one thing, you have to think of it as a relationship. It's not a transaction. So even with net impact, when you have a limited amount of time to do a project with an organization, you're not there to do what they say, right? What you are there to do is solve a problem that they have. And sometimes it's articulated in a way that makes sense for them. But when you come in, it doesn't make sense to you. And part of what your job is to really understand what the problem is. So you have to kind of be a really good listener. You have to be able to get their trust so that you can talk through what the issue is and eventually arrive at really what is the great need that they have. And so whether it's for a short-term project or like us, when you're in the sector for 20 some years, you have long-term relationships over time. I think that's one of the most important things to start with, is just to see this as a relationship. You're not buying coffee, right? You're actually helping them to solve a big problem.
Love that.
Just to build off of that, I love this. First of all, my daughter often asks, she's my chief futurist, she's 13 years old, and she'll say, is that person a client and a friend, or a friend and a client? Like, which one were they first, right? Because clients become friends, and oftentimes friends call and become clients. But resonating with you, I feel like there's 3 things that are really, really important. One is be caring. So that's exactly what you're saying about just the relationship of like caring more about the person and the project, but you get really invested in that. 2 is to really be curious. So it's like, okay, so this is the scope of the project, but there's always these undercurrents, there's always this backdrop of like, what's going on? And then 3, be clear. And the be clear is just consistent communication and just building that level of trust to be able to ensure the good times, that there's also times in the middle of projects where projects can go completely sideways on both the client side or the consulting side. So have that goodwill of trust, but having good, clear communication really sets you up for success for those times where you say, okay, great, we're now in the messy middle of whatever's happening. And it's often, a stakeholder comes back from maternity leave and you're like, oh, wow, okay, we've got to get that person up to speed, but they're a big decision maker, or the funding gets changed, or something's happening. That having that clear communication is really the right thing. So I feel like you and I are saying the same
absolutely.
things.
I mean, you have to be able to be able to communicate in a way. I mean, there's a reason why you're there and they're not doing it themselves, right? Going back to what Joel was saying, they're looking for some support, and it's a support that you're hopefully bringing to them. And so you have to understand what the role they need you to play is, and then you help them. And sometimes you're the project manager and you're kind of like keeping things on track. And sometimes you're helping them put some structure to the ambiguity of all these ideas and all these things. And sometimes you're there to help them figure out how to make it happen. How do you make it real? And so if you're in communication with them, you can listen for that. And I think having a level of understanding of what your role is, being kind of humble about it, and being able to recognize that you're not the expert of what they do. They also have chosen you because you're an expert in something that they don't do, right? It's a partnership. You have to be able to be clear about that.
So let me ask a follow-up that's related to that of the client representatives here. What do you think is a key success factor, and what do you look for in a consultant? Like, why did you pick these people or whoever you've picked over the years? What makes you think this person or this firm is better than the other?
I would plus one all the things that they said, because I think on the client side that the same is true in a successful client partner relationship. Is the partnership, is the listening and the trust building. I think really for me, when I look for a consultant, is a partner, is someone that I feel like who is just as much invested in the work and the outcome of that. It's not checking a box like, okay, got that work done. It's they want to see the successful outcome as much as I do. And I always felt that excitement from Wei Ting and the Blue Garnet team, like, this is great, this is exciting, we can do this. And so I didn't feel like it was when I would call and ask a question, or can we do this? It didn't feel like, oh, this is another thing to add to your work plan or things. It was, yeah, let's do this. Let's think about how we can do this, because they felt like a partner in this work. And that's what I look for, is really like someone who can navigate the twists and turns with me and the work that we're doing, because it's not always a straight line. Sometimes it is, some of those simple projects, and other times it's not, and they're okay with it because they are so invested in the end product as well. So I think that's an important piece along with that. I mean, it goes both ways. They're not just earning your trust, you have to give them your trust as well, and listening, and the desire for relationship building. Relationships really are at the center of so much work that we do here. What I do at the center, when I was at the foundation and our grant making, yes, there's all the money going out, but it was really about those relationships at the center. And so that goes the same with any client consultant relationships too.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, there's a little bit of therapy involved too, I think. I feel like having somebody else who you can have sort of conversations with that you might not have with other people is really important, because they help you understand that, this is normal. This is not something that maybe you're imagining. So it's really good to have someone you do trust that you can have those kinds of conversations with. But also, when you're working with a lot of stakeholders, you want somebody that will represent your organization as well, and that can speak to those folks as well, who you feel confident that they're going to be able to help represent you, and also represent sort of the work you're trying to do. Listening is a key ingredient. Someone who sometimes, I've worked with people in the past who already have ideas for you of what they think you need to do, but it's critical that you work with folks who are able to, help guide what you already know. It's already in your mind. You want to find someone who's able to pull out some of those ideas and help make sense of them and put them on paper to help you sort of really figure out what you're trying to get to.
And we joke that, like, and if it's a good idea, it's his idea, and if it's a bad idea, it's a terrible consultant's idea. So there are times, these are lonely, hard jobs. These are lonely, hard jobs trying to make impact, especially in these contexts that are cross-sector. And so to be able to have link arms and do this work together, I think is really a gift, especially if you could be a safe place to be a priest and therapist at times, where you say like, okay, I can't say this to the board, I can't say this to this group, but this is harder. I don't know how to do this, because I think we're all students, we're all teachers, and if we think that way, it helps the cross-sector work go really, really a lot better.
And I can say, it's also that it's not like you don't have ideas going in. As a consultant, you go in because you've been asked to solve a problem. And so you're like, well, if this is the problem, these are the usual solutions that can come up, or these are likely things that are going to, so you come in with like a mental model. But what's important is you don't start talking, you start by listening. And then as you hear them talking about the problem, what they've tried before, what's worked, what hasn't, like you start adjusting in your mind, or you filter down to the things that really make the most sense. And I think and your expertise coming from the outside is fantastic. And if you can link it to their situation, their current concerns, then it's a really, really powerful thing. You can really do a lot that way.
And Wei Ting and I were talking about on the drive-in here, we got to a point where we understood, like, I think Wei Ting referenced it a little bit earlier on, like, our roles, what it was our, in our relationship. And so we knew when to tap in and when to tap out. It was like, Wei Ting, you step up here and I'll step back. Or Wei Ting would call me, I need you to be the one who delivers this, or it does. And so we understood that sort of dance. And that was built over time. So these relationships don't start immediately. It is just like any relationship, it's over time, but you do have to give and not always expect to receive from the client or the consultant.
So I feel like I've been around the block for a few years. I won't speak for any of you, but if I was a student sitting in the audience and I hear about these long-term relationships and the trust building, I would be like, but I'm starting a really short engagement. They don't know me, I don't know them. Like, what does building trust look like when you're put on a project in a class or in a pro bono opportunity? What's some nuts and bolts of like starting to build these relationships that many of us have had for many years? What are some tips that you would give the group?
So at Platypus, we have a belief, and it's called put the chocolate on the pillow. And so put the chocolate on the pillow is like delight your client, delight your customer, go the extra mile. And you see it when you're with a professor or you're with a cohort, and you say, like, actually, you guys, I've already done the reading and I've brought the things and I thought the 3 questions that we could start from here. And you bring that gift, and people, and just you all could tear it apart, make it better. But I'm bringing a gift. I'm not just showing up kind of like, so putting the chocolate on the pillow is definitely like, let's go the extra. Let's go the extra on this engagement, because oftentimes, it's easier to keep that engagement and keep those clients, but you build those relationships over time. And so we've had clients that we worked with for a 6-week sprint at the beginning that have turned into 3-year engagements, but that's because we put the chocolate on the pillow and delight our clients. And so that's something that's like saying you do over time, but if you're like, nope, it's not in the scope of work, it's not in the deliverables, like we aren't gonna do that, it's hard because you have to, it's a dance between those two, I think, so.
No, please.
Oh, I was just, so I'm naturally a compartmentalizer. Like I like to think about something and focus on it, and then I move to something else and I think about it. And consulting is not that at all. Like, and what you have to be able to understand is you can put things in categories and boxes, but you're constantly taking them out and you're gonna have to deal with them. And I think one of the things that's another way I compartmentalize, sorry, the reason I brought it up is I used to think in my old job that my job was to be a really good consultant, like to do the job well. I could analyze, I can do run a spreadsheet like nobody, I could do all these things very well. And I thought that was what made for a good consultant. In the end, you want to be able to do all that, but what differentiates you is actually your ability to connect with the person that you're working with. And in the nonprofit sector, the leaders aren't there for the money, they're not there for the glory. They're really there because they believe in the mission of the work. And in so much as you can find in you the connection to the mission that they're pursuing, it's not that hard to do, right? To be able to connect with them on that is a huge win just to start with. Do your homework. What is the work that they do? What's their mission? What are the programs that they implement? Like, how do they talk about themselves? connect with them through the work that they do. And then the other part is just connect with them personally too. I mean, this is a sector where I learned to hug people when I see them. I learned to ask about children and share about my personal life too, because you're in this together for a really long time. You're not going to solve like world peace in a 6-month project, right? So you're going to see them as long as you're pursuing the same kinds of issues over time. And I'll say that I mentioned this earlier, like in the 20-some years that Blue Garnet has been around, like 99.9% of the work that we get is through word of mouth. And that's a testimonial to how personal relationships are making that connection really does make a difference, because they'll actually remember you when they have a problem they want to solve.
It is so true. I mean, it doesn't take, to your question, I think transparency and honesty doesn't take time. You know, you can be transparent with your client. I mean, there are a number of times I've also gone to my team and said, thinking this, and she's, well, you know, a little bit of managing my expectations. Let's do this. Why don't we go about it like this? And so she's not afraid to like sort of manage my expectations, but also, you know, be my morale booster as well. But also, you know, just the word of mouth thing. When we were thinking about bringing Blue Garnet on at the Center for the Strategic Planning, we passed it through to our advisory council, who is made up of different philanthropic leaders, and said, we're thinking about Blue Garnet. What are your thoughts? Have any of you worked? All of them raised their hand. Yeah, we've worked with them. We've worked with them. We're actually scoping them right now. So it is a relationship-based sector, and it goes a long way. And everyone said, perfect, terrific. They said they would be great for that.
Yeah. Joel, would you add something?
Yeah, I would. I've done a lot of projects where I've had volunteers from universities come to offer their assistance, and the ones that have worked the best are those who've really shown a real interest in the mission. Really, there's a connection there. It's a personal connection, or they really believe in what you're trying to achieve. I've also noticed there's been, sometimes it's clear when it's a class project, and other times it's clear when it's folks who are really trying to gain something or learn something. You know, I think it's okay to be humble and to be clear that this might be your first time, or you don't have all the answers, that you really picked this foundation or this organization because you want to learn, you want to grow. I think that opens a door to then seeing that there's a partnership there, and it could really help sort of, at least on your first try, to really sort of grow in this role. Because I have seen a lot of, you know, folks who come out like they have the answer, they know, very confident, which is wonderful. But at the end of the day, you know that they're not really opening themselves up to you. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, and that might help build that relationship, help grow to that next, you know, possible client down the road. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I think so many of our conversations leading up to this today had to do with talking about word of mouth and relationships, and the fact that this is a very small space. I've known these folks and others that work in this space for years. They know me, so that reputation and the caring really matters. I loved how you answered that, because I think when I see students come to some of my classes or some of these projects, they're really curious about the scope. What's the scope? What's the project? What are we doing? And I think the emphasis on what's the organization, what's the mission, and what's the why behind why they've asked for some consulting assistance. If we started the engagements there, the scope will become much more clear, and the connection and the relationship building will be very strong.
It also positions you, to better problem solve. So you may come in and they say, what we want is market research on, you know, how to enter this segment of the market. And in reality, what you hear from them is that they're looking to diversify their revenue or something like that, right? So going in and being like, I'm gonna solve that problem, I'm gonna research and find the gap, is not going to actually solve their bigger problem, even though it's technically what they ask you to do. So the really good consultants can come in and say, like, I'm learning all this about this market, but I'm getting the sense that a bigger concern is this larger revenue diversification issue. And I just want to make sure this is actually in service of that. Like it really shows that you're thinking bigger picture about the work that you're doing with them.
So I'm going to do just a quick reflection on what I've heard too, which is just setting up the conversation. Just one or two of you, we can have questions, but so many things that you've brought up today remind me of how this space has grown over the years, where it started in terms of Taproot, where it started when Bridgespan and FSG weren't around, why we started our firms. It's fascinating to think of that, and to also hear terms that you're using that weren't in the space in the beginning, whether it's social enterprise, I heard systems change, I heard storytelling. These are trends in the space that all organizations are really leaning into. So it's interesting how we weren't focusing on any of that, but those themes have come out in listening to your comments. So there's a lot more they can share with you, and they will at the reception. But do we have any questions from the audience? And if you could please introduce yourself really quickly and then ask your question. I'm pointing to you in the black hat.
Hey, Gayle, this is Tate.
Oh, hey, Tay!
She sits on our board of directors.
Tay.
My name is Tay. I'm a doctoral student in the education school in my last year, but I also run a nonprofit called Twinspire that provides financial literacy and empowerment for foster youth across the county.
Great.
And recently we've worked with consultants, particularly in being able to assess our workshops and trainings. And at the end of the scope, after the work was done, it had became apparent that the work that was completed was not going in the direction. So my question to you all, and I love the emphasis that you put on really investing in the organization, investing in the mission, in relationships, as opposed to just the scope. Because it was too late for me to actually bring up that what you did here was not needed. It was great, it's a cool report. How is this gonna help us? So my question to you is, how do you begin to have that conversation? How do you make it clear, explicit, that you're focusing too much on the scope? Think bigger, right? How do you tell the consultant to think bigger?
Thanks, Tay.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that question, because I don't think any of us are doing this work just to have a final pretty PowerPoint or report. Like, we're really trying to do it to further the field and further impact. One hygiene thing we've put in place is a midpoint review. And the midpoint review is like, we are all a work in progress, and how's this going? And is this going the right way? And we do a midpoint review internally to like assess like, how are we doing? And like, you went and all the stuff that we don't really want to show the client, the thread side of the tapestry. But then we do it with the client, and we say like, let's do like a true hour of like radical candor of like what's working, what's not. And then I always say like, I'm also available if you ever like to not be polite, but like say to us like this person doesn't seem, or what are we doing, or why did you do this? So I think that the midpoint review is a really helpful one to try to not end the project with that reality, but helping train both sides to be able to give that feedback, because we're all people pleasers, or we want to be polite or whatever, or like that's something that like to help figure out how to train each other on how to give that feedback throughout was really helpful. But it's a shame when that happens, and it happens a lot. And so I think midpoint review is just one of the techniques we've put in place to try to help keep the trains on track, or at least change it, course correct halfway through the project on what's working. That might be something, if it's not in the proposal, maybe it's something to add to say like, when are we going to do this review to see like how we're doing, and if we're in alignment, or if this is the same project we started with, because you learned more along the way. I don't know if that's helpful.
I think just to add, to add to that, yes, the periodic check-ins with the consultant, which is what we've done, but also from the client side, what you're asking is, we go in with our relationship with a consultant being pretty frank that we don't know exactly what and how to get to where we are, and we invite their expertise to help guide that and to think outside the box. And so I think just giving them that space to say like, we're open to new ideas, we're open to doing it differently, we don't really know, like, and then the opportunities for course correction. But I've certainly been on the receiving end of something that doesn't necessarily speak to what we might have been looking for, and have reflected back on like, what could I have done as a client differently, and also just and I think that's where the building of the relationship is really important, to be able to have that sort of dialogue.
30 seconds. One thing that's, I think absolutely +1 on both. And it doesn't have to be midpoint, right? You can just have some kind of a feedback loop that's built into the conversation, whether it's the client inviting it or the consultant should be asking for it too. But also, I think one of the things that sometimes happens is that consultants, especially in the more traditional approach, come in and they think what they're doing is coming in, they're doing the work, and then they come up with a recommendation. And then they hand it over to you. And I think one of the biggest differences in the social sector is that you can't do that. And you have to be really thinking about, how is this going to be used? What's the decision that is going to be impacted by this? How is it going to be real? How do you make it real? Once you start thinking that, then you realize, oh, I don't know, and I should ask my client. I should ask them what they're trying to use this for. And I think that is a natural way to actually build in that connection to make sure that what you're delivering is really useful for them.
Thanks. We'll talk more about that today. All right, you got a question there in the middle?
Yeah, my name is Kate, and I work actually on the nonprofit side in the creative economy, basically trying to expand talent pipelines and prevent talent development programs into the creative sector, mainly entertainment, arts, and culture. And a lot of my work has been expanding beyond the philanthropic or charitable side, beyond sponsorship or grant, and really becoming almost a consulting partner to the businesses and sponsors that we have, and figuring out how they can get social impact more actually integrated into the organizational structure of what they do. So my question, either on the consultant or the client side, is obviously on the nonprofit side, like Wade Ting said, like you cannot solve world peace in 6 months. And so on the nonprofit side, we're much more focused on long-term ROI and long-term wins. But on the business side, they are expecting much quicker ROI, much quicker wins. So I guess I'm wondering, and it could be from the relationship that you have or from other projects you've done, how do you get that buy-in? How do you show them that maybe there are quick wins in addition to this like long-term work? Or maybe how do you get them sort of excited about this work, that, rather than seeing it as sort of like maybe on the environmental sustainability side that they have to follow these rules or regulations, or certainly, on the social diversification of the creative workforce, it's like something we need to do. How do you get them excited and buying into a project so that they can see those quicker wins and then maybe be more invested in the long-term work that you need to do to create actual change?
Wow.
I might throw out an idea. I think it has to do with phasing. So one option is to be very clear about the fact that you have a short-term phase that's building to a longer-term phase. Because if you aren't dealing with the short-term pain point, they're not going to be necessarily in with you for the long-term relationship and trust building. So I think being very clear on to differentiate in terms of what those different goals are and create steps to achieve both of them.
Yeah, I would just add, yes, absolutely. Like, gaze to where you can make the change, but make sure you have markers along the way to be able to show that you're making progress. And I think if your communications is good, the corporation will understand that it's going to take a little bit longer. I will also say that what you're doing, it sounds like, is going into trying to change the culture of an organization. And that's change management. And in change management, you have to have some quick wins. You have to show something. So as you're working along with them, find them and make sure you spotlight and show the changes that you're getting so that they can continue to sell within and people come along with you. The third idea is just to involve them in the planning process so that they have ownership over what comes out of it.
On that note, I will thank you all. I will invite you to join us at the reception so you can ask the questions that you want to. But really, I need to thank these panelists for sharing so much with us.